What's up, guys? I hope that you are having an awesome week. In this episode, we're actually going to be discussing a touchy topic, and that is the topic of purity culture. Now, if you were a teenager in the late 90s or the early 2000s, you know exactly what I am referring to. And on this episode, we have two very special guests. First one, we have Dorothy Meole, who is the author of a few different books, some of those being Social Anxiety and God, and the others being the sci-fi fantasy series The Covenant. And then next we have Tim Brzezinski, who is a middle school and high school math teacher here in New Haven, Connecticut. To summarize it, purity culture, for those who don't know, is a social and religious movement, particularly prominent to evangelical Christianity, and it emphasizes sexual abstinence until marriage and often promotes a specific set of moral and behavioral expectations related to purity and sexuality. Now, in this culture, it typically valued a lot of things such as chastity and modesty, and it even involved a lot of teachings regarding sexual conduct, relationships, and gender roles. This movement often promotes the idea that sexual purity is a key aspect of one's moral worth and spiritual health. Now, obviously, when it comes to the biblical mandates, of course, it was designed for, between one man and one woman in the context of the covenant of marriage, of course. However, although purity culture tried teaching those principles, which in and of themselves are biblical, the way it was executed was very, very poor and really badly done in a lot of ways, including things such as, shame, guilt, and a lot of just legalistic rules and regulations that weren't necessarily in the Bible, because they saw everything in black and white. With a lot of those teachings came things such as the rose analogy, the gum analogy, the toothpaste analogy.
For me, it was, I believe it was like at a youth retreat where I heard, I think I could have sworn it was the paper analogy. I've heard all the analogies, but the paper one,
Mhm.
that's when it stuck more was like they had you pass the paper around and it would eventually end up, going around the room. And by the time it got back to the speaker, it would all be kind of like crumpled, a little wrinkled, maybe torn. Basically, what the analogy insinuated was if you allow yourself to just get passed around, like you're going to be worthless. No one is going to want you. Who wants a broken piece of paper? And at the time, I just accepted it as fact. But when it was first told to me, I accepted like, oh yes, yes, this is exactly how it's supposed to be. But
Mhm.
as I got older, um, I was struggling a lot with my self worth, and I honestly
Yeah,
do think that that part of that played a part in how I began to view myself, especially through high
100%.
school.
Yeah.
Even if
Mhm.
it wasn't something that was told to me every day, but that
It
seed
was
was
enough to be drilled into your head.
yeah, that seed was planted, and with the right soil, it started to grow. Unfortunately, very similar to the paper analogy, but basically, like if you keep, like if you like rough house with the flower, you shake it, you swing it around, and the
Yeah.
petals eventually start falling off. And basically, it was that they were basically just saying like, if you allow yourself to be like uh, used basically before the confines of like marriage,
Yeah.
um, you're pretty much worthless. You're they compare you to
Yeah. Who
a
would ever
broken
want this
flower.
broken rose,
Yeah.
basically? Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, it's set, at least for me, and I from what I've heard over the years, a lot of women who have had to sit through this analogy, it's set the precedent of you have to be this pristine, almost like you do have to just be sitting there and be make sure you're ready for whoever your future husband is. And basically it led also into like a mindset, a lot of like taking into account like, oh, maybe I shouldn't get tattoos because what if my husband
Hmm.
doesn't like tattoos? I can't tell you how many
Yeah.
times it was ingrained even before like I wanted tattoos. They were like ingraining in my brain, don't get tattoos. It's
Leviticus
not
19:28, it's a
yeah,
sin, and your body's a
apparently.
temple of the Holy Spirit, you
Oh, I
know?
can't tell you how many times I heard that one.
So
But
stop eating McDonald's if it is.
yes.
Yeah.
It set this like odd precedent that you had to be this like pure, perfect being for marriage. And unfortunately, it kind of just capped that for women.
I found that a lot of my experience with it was like looking back on it as an adult now. I look back on it and looking at the way that, like, that youth groups, like youth pastors and pastors in general, were shepherding their flocks and embracing this
Yeah.
movement as if it was a great thing. I look on it now, it's like in like they all had great hearts and they had great intentions. But when I reflect on it and even come and learn through therapy and everything like that, it's like, you know what? They were leading out of fear and not out of love. But
Yes.
they did not realize they were leading out of fear. Because if you logically think about it, right? It's so much easier to tell your youth group or tell your congregation, you know what? This is right, this is wrong. And if something, okay, holding hands, nowhere in the Bible does it say you're not supposed to hold hands.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's freaking ridiculous. The best thing to
And I will
do,
say, like, there is that concept of be careful, because sometimes it can lead to that. I would fully agree with that.
sure,
However, it became, instead of becoming an
sure,
issue of personal conviction, a lot of people, whether it was pastors, parents, whoever, they took verses and prescribed it to you falsely and said, okay, we're going to make this a black and white issue instead of, hey, some people do have different convictions than others. You should still be careful and honor God. But that wasn't happening.
right. And so, what does First John say? Perfect love casts out fear. But
Mhm.
these people were leading out of fear. I mean, like in my personal experience, like I said, I have no resentment towards, like, say, like my parents or even my youth leader. But like I said, they all had great hearts. They did.
Right.
But the way that it came across and being implemented was just it was something that like, whoa, okay, you're not allowed to go to your prom. Why? Okay, was not allowed to go to junior or senior prom. Was not allowed to. There were a lot of things I wasn't allowed to do, and so my a lot of my faith walk was defined in terms of what I couldn't do. I was a teenager from 92 till, oh gosh, probably like 98. The whole Josh Harris I Kissed Dating Goodbye book was very popular then, and a lot
Right.
of
Yeah.
youth groups were embracing it like it was the best thing since sliced bread. You're leading out of fear and not out of love. Because when you feel like you have to be protective, because oh, you might give into, you might not. But it's like, listen, he who began, the scripture also says that God who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it, will he not?
Mhm.
You teach your kids
Yes.
to have good character. Yes, they're sometimes going to make boneheaded, stupid decisions. But at the end of the day, you know what? It's like if you teach your kids to have good hearts, good character, godly character, God's still working in them when they're old. They're not
Mhm.
going to depart from that. But if a young man and young woman hold hands who they really like each other, it doesn't mean that they're going to do something that they regret. Leading out of fear and not out of
Mhm.
love.
On paper, it looked like a good idea, and yet the execution was very poorly done. You look at parents and pastors who were influenced by people such as Bill Gothard and the Duggar family and Joshua Harris, especially his book "I Kiss Dating Goodbye." It's a matter of taking those verses that describe somebody and then prescribing those same verses to you falsely. One of the biggest reasons as to why legalism is, I'll just say, quote unquote, attractive is because it appears to be a shortcut to God's holiness. What do I mean by that? Well, you take out the relationship and then you replace it with a list of do's and don'ts in a rigid way. Instead of understanding, hey, these are not universal commands, but they are personal conviction issues. No, no, no. No, you're going to follow this format to the perfect T or else fill in the blank. What they don't understand is that the reality of it is you are going to want to sin more rather than wanting to sin less if you're screamed at, guilt tripped, and pressured in a rigid way. That's just the reality of it. And it's like, well, where's God's grace in this? And Matt Chandler, he's a somewhat famous pastor. I love the way he put it one time. He says, when I was in college, I took this girl to church with me, and she was a single mom trying to get her life together, going back to college, trying to get a degree so that she could, give her kids a better life. When we went to church, the pastor says, "Okay, we're going to talk about sex." And as expected, the pastor takes out the rose. He says, "Look at this beautiful rose. Isn't it so lovely?" And, like we talked about, Dorothy, pass it around the congregation. And by the time
Yeah.
it got back to him, the stem was broken, the petals were ripped off. When the pastor he held up that rose and said, "Now who would want this rose?" Matt Chandler says, "When he did that, I was so angry." And it was taking everything, like it was so hard for me to resist the urge to just scream out, "Jesus wants the rose." And this pastor is also saying all this in front of this woman who clearly needs Jesus, is clearly trying to, going back to school to try to get a degree as a way to try and, give her kids a better life. She's obviously trying her best. Now she goes to church for the first time and hears this pastor say, if you've messed up and you hadn't stayed pure, oh boy, it's just like, really?
That's how you know, like, purity culture is not of God because there is no love attached to it. It's not beneficial towards people in the church, and it's not beneficial towards bringing people into the church. I feel like purity culture has played a big part in why people want nothing to do with God or with the church because of all of
Performance
these.
based.
Yeah,
Right.
because it's performance based, and it's this like unrealistic set of rules that will always make you feel that you are never enough, that you will never amount to this
Yeah.
level that
Hmm.
supposedly you're supposed to be at.
Even
Yeah.
though David had an affair, even though David covered it up by having the woman's husband, by having Bathsheba's husband Uriah murdered, my Bible still tells me that David was still a man after God's own heart. Again, doesn't condone what David did. There were consequences to what he did. David was still a man after God's own heart. God
Right.
still got, despite the stupid choices that we make, we're not defined by the choices that we make. Why? We're defined by God's love for us. And purity culture fails. It always failed, and it still fails to this day to grasp that.
One of the biggest things that purity culture taught was not just, don't hold hands, don't kiss, but they also taught that if a girl wears something such as a crop top or a bikini or leggings or short shorts or anything like that, it's just, oh, that's horrible. Only sinful people do that. Even though they didn't directly say it, that was the implication in which they gave and enforced on specifically on girls.
Definitely growing up, there were a lot of things that weren't inherently sinful that, like, my parents, like you said it without saying it, kind of made it feel like it was a sin, essentially, like getting tattoos. Bikinis, like, it was unheard of in my house. You couldn't wear a bikini. You couldn't even wear like shorts and a bikini top. And anyone that did, again, it's the whole saying it without saying it. Both my parents, like, with your parents,
They're
you
not
you
walking
know.
right with God if they do
Yeah,
that. So don't you dare do that. Don't follow their examples.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Even just regular clothes. I honestly don't know if it's just because we typically shopped at thrift stores or Goodwill, but my predominant wardrobe was either dresses, skirts, or t-shirts and jeans, essentially. And if I had shorts, they had to be below the knee. I couldn't even wear anything that was remotely form fitting for like a very long time. As I got older though, and I reached into adulthood, my mom especially, she was like, "Oh, you should wear this. This would look good on your, look good on you." And it would be something a little more form fitting or something with no
Mhm.
sleeves. Even like when I started shopping for bathing suits by myself, my mom would, she'd be like, "If you want to try this, you should try this." And that was just like a bit of a slap in the
Oh,
face
regarding like bikinis and stuff like that.
in bikinis because
Yeah.
it was like you grew up kind of like creating this stigma around this thing, and unfortunately, I viewed people growing up then who had tattoos, who wore bikinis, as less than because they were probably not following God. And I'm very
Right.
ashamed to say that I had that mindset, but I'm definitely grateful that eventually like God pulled me out of that.
Can we just make this general disclaimer that even though, like, say, Dorothy and I are talking about our past experiences, we don't have any hatred towards our parents or ill will,
Oh yeah,
and
no,
the
yeah.
purpose of this podcast is not to shame anybody. It's just, we're just
Right.
objectively pointing out things that, hey, they had great intentions and they meant well, you know?
The way it was executed was bad. That's all.
It's the
Yeah.
way that was executed, like, didn't turn out the way that maybe they had expected. That's the problem with a lot of the Christian culture back in the 80s and 90s where I grew up in was like it was either black or white. It's what I call codependency, which is characterized by controlling and being controlled. It's a psychological term that
Yeah.
many people only apply to alcohol and relationships, but it's a very broad
Yeah.
term. People who care a lot about what others think of them. Let's say, for example, that you're in a room. Let's say let's say you do a public speaking, you speak publicly, and there's 100 people in the room, 99% are like loving what you did, but yet there's one person in the audience who's like, you have a high level of codependency. If that one person scoffing and that bothers you more than the 99 people, then the praise you're getting from the 99 people, if that bothers you greatly, you're probably codependent. You care about what other people think of you. And again, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's a common struggle. And so, but a lot of the church back then was codependent. It was performance-based Christianity. They didn't really care what was in your heart. The family that has that, the whole shiny, happy people, mindset.
Yeah.
If you saw that series on Amazon, that struck nerves with me. I didn't have it as bad as like people like that. Like there were elements of Bill Gothard that were in my upbringing, but it wasn't like as rigid as a lot of other
Same.
people. But what I'm saying is that when you have like that, it's almost like everybody's a clone of everybody else. Follow the rules. When you give a hug, the back to butt ratio has to be greater than 10.2. Oh, when a
Yep.
woman puts on a top, they're asked like if you have more than 0.06 inches of cleavage, show, oh yeah, that's a sin, that's wrong. And we come up with these freaking cockamamie rules.
Did I hear it correctly from you, Tim, that Bill Gothard never even married, and yet he
Never
supposedly
married.
had all this authority regarding, how and how not marriage is supposed to be?
People looked at him as the center of all knowledge for what the family structure in life should be. The dude was never married.
I mean, you look at people such as Bill Goth, or no, well, yes, Bill Gothard, but such as the Duggar family, it's like they wore masks, and people think like, well, yeah, they were Christians. No, they weren't. They were a cult.
The purity culture movement failed to see how dysfunctional it was to try to control children turning into teenagers. That method of whatever. No, you're not allowed. You do not, do not, do not, do not, do not, do not, do not. Your faith is defined as a
Yeah,
bunch of do nots. The parents are two Pharisees. It's dysfunctional too. I mean, like every family is dysfunctional. It's only a matter of degree. Those families there hide the dysfunction better than families who are just
right.
broken because of some indiscretion.
Worse is that even like Bill Gothard like put this family up on a pedestal to be like, this is how your family should
Yep.
be. And anyone that couldn't achieve that always just felt guilty that they could not
Right.
be as great or righteous or pure as the Duggars. And they were the
Yes.
standard Bill Gothard set. And for a while, I feel like it worked on so many families, on so many communities.
Yeah.
I'm just grateful that the truth is out now.
My heart goes, I mean, I have so much compassion for people who grew up in that era like myself. I do. I mean, I have to show compassion on myself. I have to show compassion on other people who went through that.
Mm.
And I'll be honest with you, there were elements of that I had, of the rigidity of the black and white mindset of the lot of that I brought into my
Hmm.
marriage when I got married 17 years ago. It contributed to rockiness there. Leaders and parents and guardians, they think that, enforcing these strict rules and there's like just like conformity and all that, it's like you think you're doing well. It's like I just challenge you to think, what instead of instead of like, worrying so much about your kids' behavior, why don't you actually take time to get to learn what's really in their heart? Focus on developing great hearts and character, letting your kids know how much God loves them. And even though they may make boneheaded decisions, you still love them and be there for them no matter what. Again, every family is dysfunctional. It's only a matter of degree. I believe dysfunction in a family can be minimized when we parent our children proactively, not reactively, when we parent them out of love and not out of fear. Parents don't want to admit that they were like leading out of fear. It's like, no, I wasn't. They're in denial. And they fear that if one of their kids makes a mistake, oh, what is that going to do to the family name? No son of mine is ever going to, you know what? That's codependent behavior. That's controlling behavior.
Yeah.
And you are being controlled by what people think about you and your family name.
Hmm.
Jesus clearly wasn't like that because the Messiah came through a line of people, a prostitute, David and Bathsheba, Solomon. David had an affair with Bathsheba and Solomon. Joseph was in that family line. So you want to talk about tainted family? Go right ahead and look at your Bible. It's right there.
I'm curious, did you have to sign that covenant or contract to say, I won't hold hands, I won't kiss, I won't go on dates without a third party?
That's a good question. I dated one other woman before I met my wife, and we went out for about maybe 7 months. And yes, I signed the the the
The
covenant
covenant or
thing, and
whatever.
it's just like I look at that and I shake my head. I'm like, I really did that. I really
Right.
drank the
No, and dating
Kool-Aid.
is wrong. You're supposed to do it through courting,
Oh
like that's
my
No,
one
gosh.
of the other
it's
big
like
teachings.
I drank the Kool-Aid. That's what it was. It was brainwash. And it's just like, and I'm thinking to myself all the time, this is just so stupid. Are you afraid that, like, if I just get in the same car, like, are you afraid that 5 minutes later we're gonna go pull over in a ditch and just do it? Like, what are you
Yeah.
afraid of? I listened to people, like, it had good intentions, but it went about it in the wrong way.
And this kind of comes back to that aspect of, replacing the relationship with a list of do's and don'ts because it's a shortcut to God's holiness. It's like, well, since we're going to see everything in black and white, let's make this a universal command, even though it's not.
Whether they were people I was passing at like the store or something, I would just think, oh, they're they're doing it wrong. They're doing this all wrong. They're supposed to be courting. And that was like the whole thing mindset I had, that like, okay, if I find someone, I've got to like,
I hate that word. I'm
I know,
sorry.
I
I
hate
just
it
do.
too. I
I hate
hate
Same,
it
it.
with a
same,
passion,
I hate that
so
word.
honestly.
much.
So stupid. I was told that courtship is dating with a purpose. What about, oh, excuse me, but it's like, okay, that we're going out now. Oh, sorry, sorry, we're courting now. What about the journey in between? Does that count?
Right.
And it's
And
like I saw this funny Instagram reel once where this lady was it was a short skit. She's got the headset on and she's typing away on her computer and she goes, "Purity culture reporting hotline. How can I help you? Somebody in your youth group did not kiss dating goodbye like they should. Don't they know that they'll never ever find a spouse if they don't date? Yeah, oh, and they might kiss. That might be problematic for them. And they may even find attributes in this other in their significant other that they may not like, and that might be and that might be disastrous. And it's like it's funny, it's a skit, but that's the reality of what purity culture taught, especially Joshua Harris in his book, I Kiss Dating Goodbye.
when I had the mindset of courting, the mindset of like being a perfect ideal woman for my husband, it became less about God. It just completely became less about God. It became more about me, my image, despite what I felt, what I was realizing was wrong. Once I was able to focus on God, he was able to have me look down and see, yeah, no, this is not good. This is why it's not
Right.
working, because I don't bless it, essentially.
It's toxic, but you don't realize that it's toxic because it's sugar coated with the Bible and
Mm-hmm.
made to sound biblically true. And you kind of reminded me of this one woman who she's a Bible teacher and a theologian. Her name is Felicia Masonheimer. You may or may not have heard of her. And she's the founder of Every Woman a Theologian. In one of her videos, she was sharing about her past, or she was sharing stories about her past. And she says, both me and my husband, at a period of time in our life, we both struggled with pornography. She said, when I was struggling with that, because it was happening, because the struggle occurred during purity culture, I was told that sexual sin is only the struggle that a guy has. The girls don't struggle with sexual sin, only guys do. So she said, she's like, I did not feel as though I could open up to anyone about this because I was going to be met with shame, with guilt, and then you end up being alone or feeling alone. But the reality is, hey, this is a common struggle for men more, yes. However, even for women, there are, especially within the last 10 years, the statistics of women who struggle with
The,
pornography have
the fact
skyrocketed.
that it is the fact that you have all these social media apps like Instagram, TikTok, whatever, a lot more of that stuff is out there and more readily accessible. Back in the 90s, there was none of this. All right, the internet was just starting to come up. AOL was it took your computer 2 minutes to boot up. Now it's more acceptable in society to struggle with porn, say. And there's lots of people that have that struggle, both men and women. But back then, before all this, before the internet even existed, both genders struggled, But back then, in period culture, it was not. It was just not acceptable.
Yeah.
It was just something that no. And then if you even opened up to somebody about it, you were met with judgment or just like, ugh, like really, you're better than that, aren't you? You're better
Yeah,
than
we
that.
raised you better,
Oh, now you're making
and
it about you. Got it.
right,
See what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
exactly. People also got to realize that Joshua Harris wrote all that bull crap in his book, and then 22 years later, he goes, actually, never mind.
This is the
In
biggest
fact,
bunch of
I'm
blah.
also right. He's like, yeah, and he openly admitted, he's like, yeah, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what I was talking about. All of that is a bunch of bull. And on top of that, he didn't just kiss dating goodbye. He also kissed Jesus goodbye.
I was given the book by a woman who I considered my friend and mentor, and I gotta be honest, I do not do well reading informational books. I got through the intro and like I never ended up picking up again, but that intro stuck with me. It was the whole story about his sister having the dream about her wedding and seeing her future husband, all the girls his future husband has been with.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, a piece of me is part of them too. And that did terrify me. I will say
Yeah,
that
because it's like,
scared
oh, I
me.
gave a piece of my heart to that. These are all the girls that I gave a piece of my heart to. I'll give you what's left. And it's like, no.
Right.
Like,
Oh yeah. And I feel bad for her for having that dream if she actually did have it. That's a horrible dream.
for those watching, if you did grow up in that culture and you're still experiencing pain and trauma from those experiences in which you had,
in purity culture, I would encourage you, go seek help, go seek, therapy or some counseling. Like that religious trauma it is a big thing. It is a big deal. And there is healing from that. You can take rest in the fact that a lot of those teachings that were enforced on you, those are not from God.